Welcome to the Besties with Breasties podcast. Sarah Hall here. I am a certified health and wellness coach, athletic trainer, mom, and breast cancer survivor. I help women overcome their own mind drama to make mind shifts that open up the possibility for their most empowered and energetic life.
And I am Beth Wilmus, author, speaker, and founder of a human investment organization, otherwise known as a nonprofit, called Faith Through Fire. Our mission is to reduce the fear and anxiety that breast cancer patients feel and replace it with hope and a path toward thriving.
This podcast is about our experiences with breast cancer
and life after as young survivors and moms.
Hello.
Hello. Ken, our sound guy, we just blew his eardrums out. Hello. All right. So we're a little squirrely. We need to come out of the basement.
I know.
Do you know what we're talking about today?
Well, yeah, the title is right in front of me.
Oh, okay.
But do they know?
Do they know? They don't know. We're going to be talking about trauma, which is like kind of
the trauma llama.
The trauma llama, and it's tied to preventing recurrence or disease progression. I cannot stress this enough that I think unresolved trauma is the reason why we're getting, it can be the reason that we're getting sick, and it's the reason that we're staying sick. And I don't know why medical institutions have not zeroed in on this. It seems crazy to me because in the short time we've been doing Faith Through Fire, we have seen it over and over and over again. And yet it is not a focus. So I thought this was really interesting. According to the Center for Advanced Trauma-Informed Healthcare, they now recognize that unaddressed trauma is the hidden cause of most preventative illnesses and is associated with 8 of the 10 leading causes of death, which include heart, lung, and kidney disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, suicide, and accidental overdose.
I mean, that's all of them except for car accident.
Right. I mean, think about that. Unaddressed trauma is the hidden cause for most preventable illnesses. So they say that when we fail to address the trauma that underlies these diseases, prevention and treatment is far less effective and in some cases not effective at all. I 100% think that's true.
Yep.
So today we're going to talk about what trauma is.
And then the trends that we're seeing within the organization.
Yep. And what you can do to improve your health and reduce the risk of recurrence or disease progression.
But before we do that, let's hear from our first sponsor.
Ant's Bra Shop features skilled mastectomy fitters ready to assist you in selecting the perfect breast forms, bras, swimsuits, and camisoles for your post-surgery needs. They have 3 locations in the St. Louis area, Chesterfield and Winsville, Missouri, across the river in O'Fallon, Illinois, and a 4th location south on I-55 in Cape Girardeau. Visit Ant's Bra Shop at www.brashop.com to learn more. Okay, we're back. So do you think that people have a real grasp on what constitutes trauma? Because I think us resilient types kind of recoil at the idea of saying we've been traumatized by something.
Yes, I think initially you're just like, oh, that's not trauma. Like, I'm fine. I'll get over that. Like, you just are like, you use the fine word a lot.
Yeah, if you say I'm fine a lot,
I'm fine.
We're talking about you.
Yeah.
So according to the Federal Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, trauma is an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects. I feel like that...
Which could be like really anything.
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything. Well, everybody has trauma. Everybody has trauma.
If you witness a car accident, that's trauma.
If anything,
or if you're in a car accident, that's
we're going to talk about our own personal traumas and how we think that might have contributed to us getting sick.
I also think that trauma sort of has this like negative connotation. And I don't think that you can't avoid it. You can't avoid seeing things that are traumatic. Like even I think about like I accidentally walked in when my parents were watching like Leprechaun, and like I will never forget the scene where like the leprechaun is like stroking this lady's ankle underneath a car, and that sort of stayed with me for a long time, and I like hopped into cars after that. Like
I can't even tell you trauma. How I thought that story was going to end when you said I walked in on my parents.
Oh,
I was like, yes, that would be very traumatic.
Oh, yes. But you can't avoid that kind of stuff, and things that stick in your brain. that is a trauma, but that doesn't mean it's like, oh, I liked how my counselor put it, big T trauma, little T trauma. Even though it sticks with you, that doesn't mean that it's bad or that it's, whatever. It's not a negative thing.
I think the point is we've all endured trauma. It's what you do with that or don't do with it. And so I can only speak from my personal experience, but I don't handle stress or trauma well.
Yeah.
I do not handle it well. I know that about myself now, so I approach it differently. But I 100% think that unresolved trauma led me to getting sick. Do you think that unresolved trauma had an impact on your illness?
Yeah. I mean, I think it could.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody could say that is the reason, but I think that you could say it was probably a contributing factor.
So I've given this a lot of thought, and it's hard to talk about. Like, I was actually talking to Ken. Sarah had to take a bio break, so she was like gone.
Bio break. I had to go pee.
She had to go pee.
Bio break. I don't even know what that means.
But I was talking to Ken, who manages our sound and everything, and we were talking about how hard it is to be a parent because you're inevitably going to screw your kids up in some shape or, way, shape, or form, and we were just kind of talking through like what that looks like and how hard it is when you've made mistakes and it's impacted them on this deeper level. But I'm like, it's unavoidable. If you have children, you're going to screw up. You're going to hurt them in some way. It's going to happen. I'm like, I just want to be in a place where I acknowledge the hurt and I say, I'm really sorry. That wasn't my intention, and kind of own it. And hopefully that gives them the ability to move past it and that it doesn't hang them up. And that's what I worry about. I worry about my idiosyncrasies or the way we were raising them or something. It's going to hang them up and it's going to prevent them from living their best life. And I don't know if you can point to any circumstances in your life that you feel like have impacted you later in life. But like for me personally, I can look back at different things. I've always had an issue with vulnerability. I've always had an issue with feeling like I'm the only one that can fix things. I have to be independent. I hated weakness. I thought anybody that needed anybody was weak. And I think that all stems from when I was a child, my mom's dad died unexpectedly, like very suddenly, and she loved him to death. And so it was super traumatic for her. And I was in 3rd grade and she spiraled into a depression from it. And my mom suffered with depression for 10 years. Like it took her 10 years to kind of dig herself out of that. Well, those were the formative years of my childhood. And I think that experience, because she was there and I knew she loved me, but
and you were taught independence because she sort of was a little checked out.
Yeah, she was checked out. I mean, she was trying to keep her head above water and trying to do all the things. She worked full time. My dad was traveling all the time for work. She was trying to be a mom and do all the things. But kids are very sensitive. They know when you're not present and they know when you're struggling with something. And so we didn't know what was wrong, but we knew something was wrong. And I think that took root in me. And I think that's where that independent streak and that I hate weakness and I got to be strong. And then that would turn into defensiveness and anger. And I think
if anybody called you out on those things,
nobody ever did.
Oh,
and I think that's why it was allowed to fester and get worse. And like, I never, things are so different today. We're so much more of a woo-woo society where we're like, hey, this control
Your voice
is not,
even cracks saying that. Hey,
this control is not serving you, right?
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing with this? I mean, I talk to my kids like that, but I wasn't, my parents weren't like, hey, we're seeing some behaviors that might indicate you're upset about something. Like, let's uncover that. I just don't think that's how it was back then.
No, I agree.
But it carried with me into adulthood. And I think it is a reason why I got sick. And it wasn't because my mom had depression or because I felt like abandoned by her. It was because I never learned how to cope with that circumstance.
Yeah, because you were probably, even leading up to your diagnosis, were like, I'm independent. I don't need help. So you were taking on all the things.
It was a source of pride.
Yeah.
It was a source of pride. And if anybody said...
No, because you were mastering the things that you were taught to do as a child.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I can look back at that now, and cancer was really, really good for me because it broke me down. Yeah. Like, cancer was the moment where I was like, wow, you do not have it all together. You cannot fix this with a wave of your hand. You are not okay. And the moment that I acknowledged that and then was willing to be vulnerable about that, it's like, I don't know. It was like 30 years of therapy and 30 seconds of realization. And I really feel like a different person inside. And I think it's just because I finally figured out the root of that trauma and why it was holding me back. And I feel healthier than I've ever been, mentally and physically. And I think that played a big part of it. Do you have anything like that you like think of that was?
I mean, mine are sort of similar, I feel like, to yours. I mean, we interviewed my mom on the podcast here back when we did the hysterectomy series. And, you know, she was similar. She sort of went into a depression after, although she wouldn't call it depression because
she doesn't believe
mental
in depression.
health is a stigma thing in our family. And I think now that she would probably give it that label, but I don't think that she would say that she would have done anything differently. So I grew up with like the whole independence, but I was also a big people pleaser, which is still something that I'm struggling with now. But I think in the defense, because I sort of hate when people are like, oh, well, growing up, like, you know, this is what I had to deal with. And like, and, you know, this is like, you sort of throw your parents under the bus. And I've put myself in the shoes of me when my kids are older. Maybe this is me protecting my parents, but maybe it's also me protecting my future self.
Right.
I think that some of the situations that you're put into, you can either look at it as becoming like your crutch or your superpower. And growing up with my dad has always sort of been a little socially awkward and he talks a lot, but I watched him have conversations with people that I'm like, I probably never would have, or like making connections with people I never would have. And he sort of like talked a lot. But now I feel like I am so much like, because of how I watched him be with people and how I watched people be with him, I'm more socially aware. And it's now a superpower of mine. And so some of the things that I found really annoying or hard about my childhood have made me a better person now. Yeah, even like 100%. My mom going through what she went through, I'm like, I look back on it. And so one thing that I still am working on and sort of sorting through in my brain is that when I had Henley, when she was born, I had treatment it started 2 weeks after she was born for my cancer. And my mindset at the time was, don't miss out on your newborn's years when she's tiny because you're so focused on your treatment. So I focused heavily on her and sort of put my 3.5-year-old to the side. And I can see it now in videos that I'm watching, the way that I communicate with her. And now I'm seeing what that did to my 3.5-year-old and how she is with me and how she's like independent and how feelings sort of shut down for her. And she's like really uncomfortable with them. And it's interesting to be aware now about seeing the impacts of that and how it's playing out and then what we're doing about it now and the conversations that we're having about it now, because I think that we can be more proactive about doing something about it so that
I think just
my kids don't use their 20s and 30s to change how the trauma of their childhood is impacting them. Then they can process it now.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny that you brought that up because I had a question written down for you of, well, first of all, let's back this up because there is research based around what we're saying. There's research on adverse childhood experiences. They call them ACEs, which consistently shows that experiencing adversity during crucial or sensitive developmental stages is a fundamental cause of many severe, enduring, and costly health issues that our country faces. And again, you might be tempted to say, well, because I will say that I had a lovely childhood, right? Like my parents loved me. I didn't want for anything. They really genuinely cared about me. I never questioned if my parents loved me ever. But it doesn't mean that you don't have adversity or that you don't, like what you just mentioned. So there's 10 categories of ACEs, which include physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, growing up in a house with incarceration, mental illness, substance abuse, divorce, or violence. Now, on the surface, those might seem really extreme. But I would say that my mom's
physical
depression,
or emotional neglect.
I was going to say my mom's depression would have been emotional neglect, even though it wasn't intentional. And it's also mental illness, And so when you're dealing with that, it's like, there's no shame in it. I mean, how many people suffer from anxiety or depression? And
I mean, I feel like everybody is going to fall into this somewhere.
Right.
Because like divorce.
Right.
I mean, that's a huge
60% or 50% of households.
Yeah.
I mean, all that stuff. And so it's like, if you can't say that there's something in your history that doesn't fall into one of these things, I mean, so
you're a unicorn.
Right. We want to talk to you because we want to know what your secret is. I do occasionally meet somebody where I'm like, the sky must be so beautiful in your world. You know? Like, I'm like, I don't
It is
think
very, it is very occasional though. Cause
it is very occasional.
Yeah.
Most of the time it's not that way.
Yeah.
I did write down this note that says, do you worry about your breast cancer diagnosis impacting your own kids' mental health long term? So it's interesting that you brought
Clearly, yes.
Yeah, that your 3-year-old,
Yeah.
you know, but you weren't intentionally neglecting your
No,
3-year-old.
no.
You were just trying to make sure that cancer didn't ruin what should have been a bonding moment with your newborn.
Correct.
And so, but I think the key to making sure that your 3, you know, that she's not 3 anymore, but your oldest isn't traumatized by this long term is to just acknowledge the struggle that you were in.
Right.
Because
being vulnerable, because I think one thing that I have been, I mean, she's in therapy now, which we're trying to give her this outlet for her feelings, but being vulnerable to go to her and say, this is what I noticed about myself. And we've had this conversation. Now, whether it lands or whether she understands it, like saying, I know that my mindset was not in the right place when I was going through treatment. And I feel like I neglected you. What was that experience like for you?
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a very, in my brain that's not a counselor or a therapist, this is how I feel like it works. She's going to make up a story no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And I would rather her and I have the conversation so that we can guide the conversation together rather than her being left all by her lonesome to make up the story about why mom felt like she emotionally neglected her when she was going through something.
100%. If there's one fatal flaw that my parents made when we were going through that situation as a family, it's that nobody talked about it. Nobody talked about it. Everybody kind of coexisted with each other, each struggling in their own right, and no one cross the picket line, so to speak, to have that conversation, to form that narrative together. Hey, we just suffered a major family loss. Mom's really struggling. It's really hard for her to be present right now, but it doesn't change the way we feel about you. Blah, 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 blah.
I find this really interesting. Would you, because you didn't tell your kids about your diagnosis, do you feel like you'd do it the same way?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, that might be a little side note, but
no, I mean, we've talked about that before. Like, and it wasn't because I didn't want to bond with them or I didn't want them to know what I was going through. I mean, it was that I really didn't think that they had the capacity as a 6'4" and a 1-year-old to really understand I didn't think
what
that
was happening.
They didn't. Yeah. I mean,
but you've since.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, now we talk about it all the time. And
Yeah.
I've even said to them, like, I really question whether I've been as emotionally present for you as I should be, because I think I still can get in my own head and isolate myself. And I wonder if that's an impact from treatment. And, you know, it's funny because this is the other side of that coin, is that I will make assumptions that I've damaged them in some way. And then they're like, I mean, we don't feel...
Mom, you're way off base.
Yeah, they're like, we don't feel like that at all, you know, which can be very affirming. But I think the point is that you don't want to not talk about it, the elephant in the room. You want to kind of bring it to the front. Interestingly enough, I think in trauma care today, they talk about how it's not super useful to relive the past and to rehash it. It used to be that therapists were like, let's dig down super deep and make you cry every time, and that's healing. It's not really, I don't think they're showing that. I think they're showing now that it's really more just about acknowledgement and then moving forward.
Yeah.
I don't need to wallow in the past with my parents. I know my parents love me. It's more just about how has this impacted me and how can I use it for good. To your point, I think it's a superpower.
Yeah.
I just needed somebody to craft it that way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And save me a lot of time.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're both hoping to do with our kids.
Right.
I want to kind of talk about the trend that we're seeing in Faith Through Fire. But before we do that, let's do Boobs in the News. Boobs in the News is a fun segment where we read funny tweets by real people or ridiculous news stories.
Boobs in the News, Boobs in the News, Boobs in the News.
Do you want to talk about Ken? Can Ken be our Boobs in the News?
I think Marketplace is just so funny in general.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't do Marketplace. When I need to sell something, I send it to Sarah, and then Sarah posts it on Marketplace for me.
Okay, so our sound person is actually my father-in-law, and he told us this great story about Marketplace, which I obviously use all the time, but I'm just sort of a reseller in general. He made a dragonfly pond in his backyard and wanted to, I guess, put rock around it, and his savvy wife, my mother-in-law, got on Marketplace and found free rock. And it was at the end of somebody's driveway, and he just had to come get it. So he loads up his trailer, and he's like driving over to this house to go get rock. And he like drives up to this house in the right neighborhood, and there's rock at the end of the driveway, and he starts loading it on his truck. And
it's a lot.
And so I guess the homeowner comes home and is like,
The guy like runs up to him and is like, what are you doing?
Yeah. And he's like, well, this marketplace post and there's rock and I need this and whatever. And so he like starts
Yelling at him.
to call the cops and yelling at him. And it's this big confrontation. And he's like, no, wait, let me just show you the Facebook marketplace post. And he's like not having it. And he's like, okay, we'll call the cops. I'll show him the marketplace post. And so they end up, sort of calming down for a minute. And he looks at the post and he's like, oh,
yeah, that's my street.
That is my street. And so they have this interesting moment, and they
start unloading the rock.
They're unloading the rock, and they're talking or whatever, and the tensions de-escalate, and then he realizes, oh, I think my neighbors just down the road got rock, and I think that's actually them, and so he pulled up to the wrong house, and there just happened to be rock in both of them.
I mean, what are the odds?
It's so.
What are the odds that both of these people had rock at the end of their driveway
that looked similarly? There's so many different kinds of rocks. There's the smooth, there's the hard, there's the gravel. I mean, like, it's crazy.
So when we walked in, Ken's like, "I'm a boob, and here's why." And I'm like, "We're using that today." Yeah. I don't know that Ken's the boob in that story, though. Yeah, I kind of think it's the guy that like got so hostile, like so out of the gate.
Yeah, I think Marketplace is just silly and funny in general. People just are weird, and I'm sure I've been weird on there too, but yeah, like people just ghosting you or being like, oh yes, I'm gonna come get that, and then they don't.
I was whatever. People have scammed a
lot
of people.
I love the ones where this has only happened to me once, but you post something just because you want to get rid of it, and you're just like, I just don't feel like going to Goodwill or dropping it off wherever, so you post it for like $3 and somebody leaves you $2, and you're just like, seriously, $3 for a fan? And you left me $2? Like, so tacky. Dig in your car. Get the... I mean, I don't know.
I think before you go drive to pick something up, I know what it costs. People are just tacky.
Some people are boobs.
So tacky. Yeah. There's your boobs.
Bibs in the news. Bibs in the news. Bibs in the news.
All right, we're back. We've kind of alluded to this in the past, but oh my gosh, the amount of people that come through the program that have encountered chronic stress or a recent traumatic experience is insane. It's almost every single person.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why the medical community is not paying attention to this. It's not even a question. Did you get asked about it?
I don't think they're asking the questions.
No.
Like, yeah.
Tell me about,
and we weren't doing that in the beginning.
No,
like
we were
now. We were sort of getting people who are just like, when they would apply, they would just be like, oh, I just lost my husband, or my niece just died, or something, They weren't offering it up, but now we specifically ask, is there any specific struggles that you've gone through recently or just right before your diagnosis?
Because they'll show a lot of resilience. Like their submission will be like, I know I'll get through this. I've got a great family, and it's like resilience. And you're like, okay. And then you reach out and you're talking to them, and it's just like,
they're on the verge of crumbles.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we recognize it now, like real quick, and then it's just like, can you tell me a little bit about what the last few years have been like? And inevitably, I mean, it's some really interesting. And to your point,
no one is ever like, I love my work and I'm in the best shape of my life, and no one is ever at their peak.
No. And so it's really interesting because I mean, my biggest thought when I hear this is like, more than your medical plan, you got to get your mental health in order. And I think there is still such a stigma with that. You got to really be careful how you come at people with that.
Yeah.
I think when we train our survivor mentors, like we're always really encouraging them to like put it out there like, hey, a lot of us have benefited from getting, support from a therapist, especially one that, specializes in cancer. Have you thought of that? People can feel more defensive about their mental health, but I find more often than not, they're relieved to hear somebody care.
Yeah.
Like to have somebody validate and be like, girlfriend, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Who's helping you with that? Because I can tell you right now that if you focus on your mental health in this journey, like you will be better off.
Yeah.
And I don't know, do you feel like that's embraced, or do you feel like a lot of people have reasons why they don't want to do it?
Why they don't want to ask for help? I think it's just because the stigma is just like needing help just means that you're vulnerable, and people just really struggle with vulnerability.
I think it's that. And I also think that they're so traumatized by their new diagnosis that they don't feel like they can add one more thing to their plate.
Yeah.
The encouragement would be do it anyway.
They downplay it. Like, oh, well, this is not that bad. I'm only stage 1. Like, how much help could I really need? Or I don't know. People have had it way worse than me. I really have everything I need. My insurance is going to cover this. And they just find the things to cling to, which is good. It's like that sort of shows the resiliency of them. But I mean, I think
feel
about
like
the respite house. Like when we opened the House of Hope in Innsbruck, like we thought we would just get flooded with people asking to want to go out there. And like even when we called the off room, they're like, I mean, do I need that? There's got to be somebody who needs it more than me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just people just talk themselves out of feeling like they need it. Yeah.
Yeah. They don't think they're worthy of care. And I think that's like a really interesting trend is like
worthiness,
right? Like you're worthy of care and consideration and being taken care of. And that seems to be a really tough pill for a lot of people to swallow. And the question is why?
Yeah.
You know, I don't think I felt worthy of like care, but I don't know why, because I know like I can't point to like the situation with my family because I'm like, I always felt cared for.
Yeah. I think we're worried about putting people out.
Yeah, but why?
I don't know. I do remember when like Eric's fire department, like a lot of the families banded together and were bringing us food. And I remember being like, but what? Like we don't really like we are capable of cooking and like I'm not responding to chemo in a way that like we're like not bedridden or anything. Like we're totally fine. And I remember one time they brought us a meal and we were like, okay, can you drop it off at this time? Because we have a wedding to go to. Like it just didn't feel like we were worthy of putting somebody else out for their time. You know?
I also don't think that when you're in that moment, like you think you're carrying on business as usual. And it's only in retrospect that you look back and you're like, I was not okay.
Right. Yeah.
You know
like
what I mean?
Probably should have taken a step back. Like we should have focused more on spending time with the family and like doing less. Yeah.
I just think, I mean, we're trying to maintain normalcy because that gives us a sense of security, but it doesn't mean you're okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, Gary and I struggled with asking for help or allowing people to help too. It's like when people would want to do things for us, we felt guilty. And then finally I just told Gary, I'm like, if cancer is not a good enough reason to accept people's help, like, is there ever something that we're going to say it's okay to help us with?
Yeah.
You know, and allowing people to help really took so much pressure off. We do see this trend, especially with people who have lower socioeconomic means. They accept the least amount of help. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a fascinating...
Well, if you look at Maslow, like if your basic needs are not met or if you're stressing about like...
I think that's the obvious interpretation, but do you know what I think it is?
What's that?
I think it's unresolved trauma. They tend
like,
to have more trauma.
They're low socioeconomic because of the trauma?
No. Oh. I think they're less likely to ask for help because of the trauma. Like I think there's more trauma in their history is what I notice.
Yeah. Or that they
but like you're saying, the hierarchy of needs, like they're not going to worry about their mental health if they can't keep their lights on or food on the table.
Yeah.
But I have noticed that the people who need it need support the most don't always, I don't know, it's an all or nothing. Yeah. Either they want everybody to do everything for them and they want to take no accountability for their life, or they are just like so afraid to ask for help or to show vulnerability that they won't.
Yeah.
It's really extreme, honestly.
Yeah. But it is pretty cool the feedback that we get from the people who ask for a mentor, and maybe it's the first time they've really asked for help, the amount of support and appreciation that they feel for that. Mm-hmm. Because it's like, wow, it was not difficult to ask. And then what I received, while it didn't really like require so much effort, like meant the world to me, you know?
I also think it's interesting that a lot of times they don't recognize how helpful it was to have that support until after their nervous system calms down.
Right.
You know, it can be hard to know how to support somebody whose nervous system is on fire.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is really cool that Faith Through Fire does now is we've recognized the emotional stress and mental health issues that come with a stage 4 diagnosis. Mm-hmm. It's a total mind bender, you know, when you get that diagnosis. And there really isn't anything out there for patients to navigate the emotional ups and downs of what that looks like.
Yep.
And so Faith Through Fire has begun providing EMDR trauma therapy for metastatic patients. Mm-hmm. And we've seen some really neat things emerge out of that.
Yeah.
And so I just think that mental health needs to be a much, much, much bigger focus in healthcare. Okay. What do we think we should be doing to reduce recurrence or disease progression?
Well, obviously addressing your trauma.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm such a man in the fact that I just want, like, I want to fix it, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can't fix that.
I think that's a human condition. I don't think it's a man thing.
No?
No.
I feel like men are more like...
No, I think women definitely want to fix it. Men, I mean, I think it's just everybody. Like, even when you're hearing somebody's, like, story, you're automatically like,
well, just
what
do
can
this.
I do? And how
Yeah.
can you fix this? Yeah. Like, I think it's just a condition of humans. Like,
I did come across
humans who care.
Yeah. I came across this article by the Cleveland Clinic that I thought was interesting. It was talking about putting together a personal wellness plan with built-in periods of recovery and self-care to manage stress and empower yourself to make healthy life changes.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, that sounds good. What does that mean? You know?
Oh, I can tell you what this means to me.
Okay.
I feel like this is what I feel like I have tried to do. So, and it's sort of what I do for the first responders that I teach yoga to, is that what they teach in the yoga and the first responder sphere is that like they're constantly running crappy call after crappy call that's seeing like something really traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
And what you have to sort of get in the practice of doing is like, as soon as you see that, and as soon as you do that, like do 3 minutes of breath work after, evaluate it in your mind, relax your nervous system, because the higher your nervous system stays heightened, like the longer you let that go, like now it just becomes part of you. So if you manage it in the moment, you got to
complete the stress cycle.
Right, exactly. Complete the stress cycle. So get it elevated and then like bring it back down. But use the tools that you have.
Don't suppress, because if you suppress, you're just leaving that cycle
you're just
open.
stuffing it in your body somewhere, and then it's going to come out as disease, or it's going to come out as like a diagnosis of some sort.
Chronic stress.
Yeah. And so I do the same thing. So I knew I wanted to add in some kind of meditation. So now I go to a weekly, it's like totally for my nervous system. It's eyes closed, relaxation, there's sounds, but it's built into my week where I know I'm going, and it's where I practice shutting my mind off every week. But it's scheduled.
I mean, you're really good about that. I'm more like, I need a tune up. I'll show up for this one thing and then I won't do it for 6 months. You're very regimented with that. I tell you, everybody that's listening, you need to be doing some sort of self-care plan. Something. Because here's the thing. You tell me if you don't fall into one of these categories, because this is symptoms of stress. Difficulty sleeping. How many people do we know that don't sleep? Over or under eating. Skin problems. Substance dependency. Lack of energy. Less interest in sex. Anxiety, depression, irritability, negative thinking, forgetfulness, unfulfilling jobs, work overload, loneliness, loss of meaning, bowel problems, unforgiveness. If I didn't just list something that you struggle with, like, you are a freaking cyborg.
Oh, here's another unicorn moment.
Yeah. I don't know who doesn't struggle with some of these things. And in our modern world, you cannot manage this without some sort of intentional care.
Yeah.
So it is one of my goals to get more regimented like you, because I am really bad. I'm about, it's like my roots. I don't notice until they're like 6 weeks past due. And you don't want to get to that
your
point.
Roots. You mean your hair roots?
Yeah, my roots.
Got it.
It's like you don't want to get to that point. You don't want to be in the pit and then realize, like, shoot.
It's a lot harder to get out than to just
to prevent it.
Step out of the puddle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, okay. And this is like where we get a little preachy with you. Sarah doesn't like it when I use the word exercise. She likes the word movement.
Well, that was brought on by somebody else.
But you're just churching it up. You're churching it up.
Yeah, but it just makes it more accessible.
Guys, you have to exercise. You have to. And you have to lift weights.
You can do it however you want to.
Yeah. But if you lift weights and you exercise, it's going to benefit you.
Yeah.
Once we've had cancer, you have to do it.
Yeah.
Now, full disclosure, right now I lift weights once a week. It is not near enough. I don't want to do anymore. I don't like doing it. I am trying to get myself to do it more. It's not like I'm saying it's easy. I'm just telling you what you need to hear, which is that you need to be doing it.
Yeah.
You have to express your emotions.
Yes.
You have to. It's not I'll try. It's you have to. You have to set boundaries.
Yes.
Okay?
There's a great book, Set Boundaries, Find Peace, something like that. Oh, no. Yeah. Set Boundaries, Find Peace. There's like a workbook that goes with it and everything. If you
have trouble with boundaries, or you have toxic people in your life, or you don't know how to manage a really stressful situation, there are a bajillion self-help books.
Yeah.
And that would be an excellent thing to talk about with your therapist. You have to stay connected with people. I don't care if you're an introvert. I'm an introvert. You have to stay connected. You have to focus on gratitude.
Mm-hmm. Because that's focusing on the positive, not on the negative.
Yeah. And our community is very gratitude focused, but also you cannot worry when you're focused on what you're grateful for.
Yeah.
And then you have to find meaning and purpose. You have to Sarah's point about using your traumas to like be your superpower. It's entirely possible. It takes intentionality. It takes work. It takes gratitude. It takes realizing that we're all people, capable of mistakes. But you can find purpose and meaning, and you can use your experiences to help other people. And I promise you, it's going to be super healing.
Yep. Before we reflect on the sources of your stress and just like sort of what we want to leave you with today, let's hear from our second sponsor. Thrive In is a proud sponsor of Faith Through Fire. Thrivent believes money is a tool and not a goal. The Gateway Financial Group with Thrivent is local to the St. Louis area and can work with you to create a financial strategy that reflects your priorities and helps you protect the things that matter to you, like family and giving back. Please call 314-783-4214 to schedule a free consultation with one of Thrivent's Gateway Financial Advisors. We are back. So I think what we want to leave you with today, because I know this for some listening to this episode about trauma and like past history and childhood memories and everything can be really overwhelming. So like, what can you do right now? And our best advice would be just reflecting on your stress, maybe even journaling about it and just putting your thoughts down, or even just closing your eyes and just having a moment, but identifying then like what you want to do with that. What comes up for you, maybe set some goals, be specific. And then if you like feel motivated to make change from that, like that's a great place to find your why.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't say that better, so I'm not going to. All right, guys. Until next time.
See ya.
Thank you for being a listener of the Besties with Breasties podcast. If this podcast had a positive impact on your journey, leave us a review or consider becoming a supporter. You can donate with the link in the show notes or at faiththroughfire.org. This episode was hosted by Sarah Hall and Beth Wilmus, audio and production edits by Innovative Frequencies.